At the beginning of the Civil War, the island city of Galveston was considered to be the best harbor in the Confederacy west of Mobile. However, the Confederate commander of the Department of Texas, Brigadier General Paul Hebert, decided it could not be adequately defended. In early October 1862, he let it fall to the Yankees with barely a fight. The fall of the city began soon after a brief exchange of gunfire between Confederate shore batteries and the superior guns of the Federal blockading fleet in the bay. The inadequacy of the Confederate batteries against the Federal ships compelled Colonel Joseph Cook to call for a 4-day truce, time in which he used to evacuate his men, his artillery, and most of Galveston's civilian population over to the mainland. Then, on Christmas Day, 1862, 3 companies from the 42nd Massachusetts Infantry, totaling just 264 men, moved ashore to garrison the town. On their arrival, they met no resistance to speak of. The Federal troops quickly occupied and fortified a storehouse located at the end of Kuhn's Wharf. They removed planks from the wharf to use as breastworks, which also made it nearly impossible for a large attacking force to rush the storehouse from the shore. Unfortunately for the men of the garrison, the replacement ammunition they were supplied with matched the rifled weapons of only one of the companies. The other 2 companies carried smoothbore weapons, which would obviously become useless without replacement ammunition. So in order to maintain morale, the Union soldiers were kept in the dark about the ammunition fiasco and were instructed not to fire the weapons unless expressly authorized by their officers. Besides fortifying their position on the wharf, the Federal troopers also went on scouting missions in the nearly closed down city. And because of that, it seems that many unauthorized souvenirs found their way to Kuhn's Wharf following those scouting missions. In fact, the civilians that remained in Galveston did not fare very well at all during the occupation. The gas factory closed, so the city was almost completely dark at night, except for the dim light of candles and oil lamps. The markets were often out of food, and what little food there was went for staggering prices. Wives and children wrote to their Confederate soldiers to inform them of their dire circumstances and pleaded for assistance. Confederate General Paul Hebert was soon replaced by Confederate Major General John Magruder as commander of the Department of Texas. The flamboyant Magruder, also sometimes referred to as Prince John, was charged with restoring order out of the chaos. He immediately recognized Galveston's importance and began working to reclaim it. He decided on a joint land-sea invasion. He cobbled together a mostly inexperienced invasion force and a few military pieces. The attack was simple. He would use ships, such as were available, to distract the Union squadron in the bay, while his infantry stormed across the railroad bridge that connected Virginia Point on the mainland to the island. His strategy was to surprise and capture the Federal garrison on the waterfront. The Navy would be a challenge for Magruder, since there were only a handful of civilian vessels to work with. The steamers Bayou City and Neptune No. 2 were converted into cotton-clad gunboats. Bales of cotton were stacked on the decks of the steamer to 300 or so Confederate attackers from small arms fire. Only one large rifled gun was available to arm the cotton-clads. The rest of the men were deployed as sharpshooters on board, and believe it or not, shotguns. On New Year's Eve, 1862, the Confederates made their move to retake the... In the afternoon that day, the Neptune II steamed from Harrisburg towards Galveston, which was about 45 miles away. She was followed by the Bayou City and 2 unarmed tenders. They planned to arrive after nightfall. Under the cover of darkness, Magruder ordered the vessels to get up as close as possible to the Union fleet without being detected. They were told not to engage the Federals until they heard a cannon signal. That signal was planned for 1 a.m. in the morning. At dusk, Magruder's Confederate land forces were massed at Virginia Point and ready to move. The railroad bridge that connected Virginia Point to Galveston had been planked over to facilitate the movement of troops and artillery across. The command to advance was finally given, and the Confederates began moving across the bridge. They were ordered to be as quiet as possible so as not to be detected before they were close enough and in position. But the bridge crossing did not happen quite as planned. It seems that some of the artillery mules were causing a critical delay. The frustrated cannon crews were forced to take the harnesses off the mules and haul the guns across the bridge themselves. Things did not go as planned for the naval arm of the attack either. About 2 miles from the harbor, Confederate Major Leon Smith on Bayou City saw signal flares and realized that his small cotton-clad fleet had been spotted. The Confederate vessels immediately retreated out of sight to wait for Magruder's cannon signal. In the meantime, the flagship of the Federal fleet, the USS Westfield, moved in to investigate the report of the approaching Confederate vessels. In the early morning darkness, she suddenly ran aground on a sandbar in the harbor, stranding Fleet Commander William Renshaw, effectively taking him and his powerful gun out of the picture. Frustrated with his situation, Commander Renshaw ordered 2 of his other ships, the Saxon and the Mary Boardman, to come up close so that the crew of the helpless Westfield could be picked up. Reluctantly, he also decided that the Westfield needed to be destroyed to prevent its capture by the Confederates. So before evacuating, Renshaw had the decks covered with turpentine, and trails of black powder were laid leading to the open ammunition magazine. Once the crew had piled into small evacuation boats, Renshaw lit a slow match and joined them. The Federals quickly rowed their boats away from the Westfield, hoping to avoid the effects of the expected explosion. However, the blast did not occur right away. Renshaw probably thought that the fuse he had lit, so he ordered his small boat back to the Westfield so he could relight it. As he approached the sandbar, the Westfield blew up, obliterating Renshaw's small boat and the 13 men in it. Meanwhile, the attacking Confederate land forces made their nighttime approach into Galveston almost completely unnoticed. The men of the Federal garrison were totally distracted by the naval activity in the bay. Because of the delay in getting Magruder's land, the signal to begin the attack did not happen at 1 a.m. as planned, or at 2 a.m., or even 3 a.m. The Confederates were not able to advance close enough to attack the Union garrison until nearly 4 o'clock in the morning. Magruder personally fired the gun to signal the start of the attack. Within minutes, the entire Confederate line opened up with artillery and rifle fire, aimed at both the Union gunboats in the bay and the Massachusetts troops on the wharf. The Federal fleet responded in kind with deadly accuracy. Now, Magruder knew that the Union position on Kuhn's Wharf could not be taken by frontal assault. So, he ordered 500 men into the water on either side of the wharf. They waded out into the shallow surf carrying ladders. By protective fire from sharpshooters at the ends of on either side of Kuhn's Wharf. The attacking Confederates planned to scale up onto the wharf using the ladders and capture the Union position from the rear. It was probably a good plan in theory, but it quickly went awry when the attackers realized that the ladders they brought along were too short to reach to the top of the wharf. They had no choice but to retreat, running a gauntlet of deadly fire from the Union troops on the wharf. Some of the Confederates were able to retaliate by climbing onto nearby rooftops and tall buildings, upper stories of tall buildings, and returned fire down onto the Union troops on the wharf. 2 troopers of the 42nd Massachusetts were mortally wounded. But soon, the superior guns on the Union ships effectively drove the Confederate land. One survivor described the scene as, quote, the crashing of walls and falling timbers and a constant rain of bricks, mortar, and roofing as the shot and shell plunged through buildings, added to the crash of many hundreds of window panes, assisted to make the night hideous. Unquote. We can only imagine what that was like. This is pre-dawn hours. It soon turned in favor of the Confederates. The Harriet Lane was the first Union gunboat engaged. Both cotton-clads attempted to ram her at the same time from opposite sides. The Neptune made a strike but was badly damaged and sank in shallow water after ramming the larger Harriet Lane. But the Bayou City was successful in her second ramming attempt. The collision locked the 2 ships together, allowing attackers from the Bayou City to storm onto the Harriet Lane and overcome her crew. During the close hand-to-hand fighting, Union Captain Jonathan Wainwright and Executive Officer Edward Lea were both killed. 4 other crewmen on the Harriet Lane also died. Meanwhile, sailors on the nearby USS Owasco saw the encounter and steamed to the aid of the Harriet Lane. The Union gunboat fired away as she approached, attempting to drive off the Confederate attackers, not knowing that the Harriet Lane and the Bayou City were hopelessly locked together. In response, the Confederates brought the surviving Union prisoners up on deck and placed them at the front of the Harriet Lane as a human shield, hoping to discourage the Owasco from further firing. The Confederate ship, the Bayou City, locked to the Harriet Lane. Neither one of them could return fire, so they were sitting ducks, basically. That ploy worked. The captain of the Owasco halted his rescue attack and retreated a short distance. He wanted to avoid harming the Federal prisoners. A white flag of surrender was then raised over the Harriet Lane. Then, under a flag of truce, a Confederate captain took a small boat from the Harriet Lane and approached the Owasco. His intent was to demand the surrender of the entire Union fleet. His leverage for the surrender demand included the threat of using the guns on the captured Harriet Lane against the Federal ships, and that 2 additional cottonclads would arrive soon, and that a large Confederate land force was ready in reserve, all of which were bluffs. Underwing officers were allowed a little time to ponder their response. Then, just before the flag of truce was to expire, and to the complete surprise of the Confederates, the Union fleet simply steamed away, heading for New Orleans. The Federal garrison on shore was left to fend for itself. The Battle of Galveston resulted in 26 Union casualties. 1 Federal gunboat captured, the Harriet Lane. The Union flagship blown up, the USS Westfield. And the remaining 5 Union ships were driven off. The island city of Galveston would remain in Confederate hands for the remainder of the war. In January 2004, the Lieutenant Commander Edward Lea Camp installed this marble monument. It is dedicated to the memory of the brave Federal soldiers and sailors who perished during the Battle of Galveston or died soon thereafter from their wounds. The name of each loyal serviceman is inscribed on the top surface. Those heroes paid the ultimate price, doing their small part to preserve the nation and the dream on which it was founded. A bouquet of red roses has been placed upon it, a small but meaningful, heartfelt token of our appreciation for service rendered and sacrifice made on New Year's Day, 1863. The battle of long ago was relatively small and is mostly forgotten today. However, for those men in blue who fell that day, and for their families, it was momentous. It is our duty and our honor to preserve the memory of those men and their actions by conducting this memorial ceremony each January. Let us never forget them and keep fresh the memory of how much they sacrificed for us.
From the USS Harriet Lane, Commander Jonathan Wainwright, Lieutenant Commander Edward Lea, Willis F. Monroe, John Hart, Joseph Pollock, First Class Boy Henry Newton. From the USS Westfield, Commander William Renshaw, Lieutenant Charles Zimmerman, William R. Green, John Callahan, Gunner Sam King, William Essen, Randolph Hibbert, Henry Bethke, Peter Johnson, Matthew McDonald, Hugh McCabe, William F. Reeves, George E. Cox. From the USS Oswego, Thomas Jeff, Frederick Saunders. From the USS Sachem, Philip Duffy. From the 42nd Regiment Massachusetts Volunteers Infantry, Private Francis Knott, Private David Chapin. Will you now please join with me in a moment of silence to reflect on the sacrifice made by these brave individuals. Thank you.
Above their rest, there is no sound of weeping. Only the voice of songbirds thrills the air. Unknown their graves, yet they are in God's keeping. There are none missing from His tender care. He knows each hallowed mound, and at His pleasure marshals the sentinels of earth and sky. O'er the repose kind nature heaps her treasure, fanned by soft winds which round them gently sigh. Bravely they laid their all upon the altar, counting as naught the sacrifice and pain. Theirs but to do and die without falter, ours to enjoy the victory and the gain. They are not lost. That only which was mortal lies 'neath the turf or arched by southern skies. Deathless they wait beyond the heavenly portal, in that fair land where valor never dies. In the great heart of coming generations, their fame shall live, their glory never cease, even when comes to all earth's troubled nations God's perfect gift of universal peace. He that loses his life for my sake shall find it.